So here's a schematic of how the heart fits in with the systemic circuit and the pulmonary circuits. Remember, the heart is basically just the pump at the center of the cardiovascular system. Vessels, arteries, and veins just carrying the blood. Remember, arteries leave the heart, veins return to the heart regardless of whether they're carrying oxygen-rich or oxygen-poor blood. Or oxygen-rich blood is usually red in diagrams. Oxygen-poor is usually blue. What you're typically familiar with probably is the systemic circuit, where arteries have oxygen-rich blood, veins returning back to the heart have oxygen-poor blood. The pulmonary circuit is the exact opposite. Arterial blood leaving the heart is oxygen poor, and venous blood returning to the heart from the lungs is oxygen rich. So in the pulmonary circuit, arteries carry oxygen poor blood and veins carry oxygen rich blood, kind of the opposite of what you're typically familiar with the systemic circuit. Also, you should know the coronary circuit is kind of a subset of the systemic circuit. The coronary circuit delivers oxygen to the muscle of the heart itself, and we'll see that shortly with the coronary arteries. So with an anterior view of the heart, you can see the large vessels that enter and leave the heart. So entering the right side of the heart, you have the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava entering into the right atrium. Externally, you can see a structure called the auricle on each atria. The auricle is kind of an ear-like scalloped or ridged flap. Auricle literally means ear, so you see that it's an external structure of the atria. You also see the large blue pulmonary trunk leaving the right side, the right ventricle, and going to the lungs, splitting to the left and right pulmonary arteries. Again, one of those, the right pulmonary artery kind of going underneath the arch of the aorta. So coming back from the lungs, entering the left side of the heart, you have the right and left pulmonary veins. Again, very small posterior structures. And you've got two from each side. So those enter the heart at the left atria, leaving from the left ventricle. The heart pumps blood through the aorta. The first centimeter or so before the arch is the ascending aorta. Then you have the aortic arch, where it does a 180-degree turn and contains three arch vessels that go to the head and arms. And then you have the descending aorta as it turns back and starts to descend through the thorax. Also, you have an anterior posterior interventricular sulcus on the surface, kind of covered in adipose, and you should be able to see an artery, a coronary artery and vein traveling in each of those sulci as well. So posteriorly, you can again see the left and right pulmonary arteries as they leave the trunk, kind of under the arch of the aorta. You see the beginning of the descending aorta there, kind of open at that cut edge. I would say what you see there is the arch and the three arch vessels. Again, the SVC and the IVC are two of the three blood sources from the right atrium. The third comes from the coronary sinus. That is all you need to know regarding the coronary venous system, is the coronary sinus. Basically, all the coronary veins coalesce and dump into the sinus, and then the sinus dumps into the right atrium. So the three holes in the right atrium where blood enters, you have the SVC, IVC, and coronary sinus. Again, on a posterior, you see the posterior interventricular sulcus and the artery and vein that travel through that as well. And then you've got your left and right pulmonary veins entering in the posterior side of the left atrium. So you have a kind of a dissected, along kind of a coronal view of the heart, as well as what you see above as kind of almost a transverse type section. Take a look at Figure B on the top right there before we talk about anything else. And you can really see that the right ventricle is really just an accessory on the side of the left ventricle. The interventricular septum, the wall between the right and left ventricle, is really more functionally part of the left ventricle. The left ventricle has got the thicker myocardial layer, the muscle layer, and the left ventricle generates a whole lot more pressure than the right ventricle does. If you think about the left ventricle, it has to generate pressure to push blood all the way to the tip of your toes. The right ventricle is really just pushing blood to the lungs, which is right next door to the heart, so it does not generate near the pressure that the left side does. So just kind of appreciate how, small the right ventricle is, and it's really just kind of hanging on the side of the left ventricle, which really does the major work of the heart. So looking at figure A, again, you've got that kind of coronal section. You can see the thickness of the walls of the left ventricle versus the right ventricle. Left ventricle walls are much thicker. You've got a good view of your pulmonary semilunar valve. Again, the semilunar valves do not have the heart strings. The tendinous cords, some books refer to them as chordae tendineae. They Latinize them a little more. But your AV valves, the atrioventricular valves, the right tricuspid valve and the left bicuspid or mitral valve, are attached to the walls of the ventricles through the tendinous cords or the heart strings, and those are attached to these papillary muscles, these finger-like projections out of the ventricle walls. The papillary muscles pull and contract on the heart strings and the tendinous cords as the ventricle contracts and prevent those flaps of the valves from inverting and allow blood to flow backwards. So they're very important in the functioning of those atrioventricular valves. And obviously the function of the valves should always be 100% to keep blood from going backwards to the heart. It's imperative to keep blood flow in one direction when it's going through the heart. Also in this diagram, you've got labeled the endo, myo, and epicardium. That is definitely something you should know, the three layers of the heart. The endocardium is inside. If you've ever heard of bacterial endocarditis, that's where you've got bacteria in the blood, and they kind of set up within those trabeculae carnae, those deep grooves within the ventricle. The myocardium is the thick muscle layer of the heart. That is the cardiac muscle layer that does the work of the heart. And the epicardium is the outer layer. The epicardium is also known as the visceral pericardium as well. If you remember the first semester material, visceral and parietal pericardium surround the heart. The visceral layer is on the heart muscle itself. The parietal layer is where it turns back and kind of lines the cavity where the heart sits, and the serous fluid is between the two. So the epicardium and visceral pericardium are really just one and the same. So again, kind of a anterior view of the heart with a little bit of the pulmonary trunk removed so that you can actually see the coronary arteries. I would argue some fat has been dissected as well, because usually there's a lot of fat deposited around those arteries. All I will make you know as far as the coronary circuit, I want you to know that the right and left coronary arteries are the first branches off of the aorta, as you see there, even before the three arch vessels. The left coronary artery splits into the circumflex and the anterior interventricular artery. The right coronary artery splits into the right marginal branch of the coronary artery, and it also is the posterior interventricular artery that you'll see on the next slide. So again, a posterior view of the heart, and you see again the right marginal branch of the right coronary artery and the posterior interventricular artery from the right coronary artery, and then, like I said, the circumflex branch and the anterior interventricular artery come from the left coronary artery. So if you just know that much regarding the coronary circulation, that and the coronary sinus is where all the coronary veins coalesce before it dumps into the right atrium. That's all I'd appreciate. I want you to appreciate for the coronary circuit. Just understand again, the heart does not use the blood that it pumps through it. All right, it has its own subset of the systemic circuit. So just kind of refresh your memory what it is we're looking at. Remember, cardiac muscle fibers are relatively short when compared to skeletal muscle fibers. They have the intercalated discs, which help to keep that electrical transmission from cell to cell, keep that going nice and fast, as well as they have the branching that allows that signal to really spread throughout the tissue as well. Again, cardiac muscle cells have one nucleus. but those two features, again, the branching and the intercalated discs, help to spread that electrical signal out and have more a uniform contraction of the heart.